Every life contains a few unfinished conversations, unasked questions, and quiet moments that continue long after they should have faded. This is, if I could say one more thing, stories inspired by real people, real emotions, and the roads we might have taken if life had turned just slightly differently. Most of us assume the important moments in life arrive with some kind of warning. A wedding, a goodbye, a phone call, a decision. But sometimes, the moment that changes something begins with a minor inconvenience. In today's story, two colleagues return from a corporate retreat in Rome. They've spent years working together, exchanging polite conversations, conference coffees, and the occasional joke. Then a missed train leaves them unexpectedly stranded in the city for one long summer night. What follows isn't romance or drama or a grand revelation. It's something quieter. This is The Train We Didn't Catch. The conference hotel in Rome had the emotional atmosphere of an airport that had recently gone through a divorce. Everything was beige in a way that suggested compromise. Beige carpet, beige chairs, beige pastries arranged with the optimism of people who had never actually attended a corporate retreat before. Somewhere in the lobby, a machine hissed out espresso with the exhausted determination of an employee nearing retirement. Francesca Bellini stood near the registration table holding a canvas tote bag, a rolling suitcase, and the kind of tightly controlled expression worn by people who had already answered 12 emails before 8:30 a.m. Across the lobby, someone waved. Davide Ricci was approaching with a paper cup of coffee and the slightly rumpled appearance of a man who had accepted long ago that jackets cannot truly be wrinkle-free in Italy. Davide worked in leadership development, which sounded important until someone asked what it meant, at which point even Davide became vague. He stopped beside her and glanced at the conference banner. Reimagining human connection in modern workspaces. You know, he said, the fact that this sentence exists suggests modern workspaces may already have failed. Francesca laughed once through her nose before she could stop herself. It annoyed her slightly that he could do that. Not make her laugh exactly. Make her forget herself long enough to do it naturally. They had known each other for nearly 7 years in the particular ecosystem of corporate familiarity, where people knew your dietary restrictions, your preferred presentation software, and the exact face you make when someone says, "Let's circle back," but not necessarily anything important. Francesca knew Davide lived in Milan, had a daughter studying architecture in the Netherlands, hated team-building exercises involving balloons, and once left an executive meeting because someone used the phrase disruptive synergy twice in under a minute. What she did not know was whether he was lonely or happy or in love. Corporate life creates strange intimacy that way. You can spend years beside someone without ever learning the shape of their actual life. Inside the conference room, the keynote speaker discussed human-centered collaboration, with dazzling white sneakers and the energy of someone who had once described himself as a thought architect without irony. Francesca took notes automatically, not because she cared, because writing things down made her feel less trapped. Beside her, Davide leaned over slightly. "I think this man moisturizes competitively," he whispered. Francesca pressed her lips together hard. Too late. A small sound escaped. The keynote speaker glanced in their direction. Davide nodded solemnly at him as though deeply moved by innovation. Francesca stared down at her notebook, shoulders shaking silently. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she realized something alarming. She was having fun. During the coffee break, they stood near a table of pastries, pretending to be breakfast. Francesca reached automatically for a napkin before taking one. Davide noticed. "You prepare for crumbs in advance," he said. She looked at him. "You're strangely observant today." "I've always been observant." "No," Francesca replied, stirring sugar into her coffee. "You've always been quiet. That's different." Davide considered this. "That may be the nicest insult anyone's ever given me." That made her laugh properly, not elegantly, an actual laugh that escaped before she could reduce it to something more professional. A woman from HR glanced over approvingly, as though delighted to see employee engagement occurring organically. Francesca lowered her head slightly. "Oh God," she muttered. "Now they'll think I'm networking." Davide took a sip of coffee. "Relax. Nobody here knows how to network. They just move around holding glasses and saying, 'absolutely' a lot." She laughed again. This time, Davide noticed something small. Her shoulders had dropped, only slightly, but enough. Enough to suggest that beneath all the efficient posture and careful sentences, there was someone else still there, someone less managed, someone who had not yet been fully converted into calendar invitations. He didn't say anything. Some observations are better left unannounced. By late afternoon, the conference had entered its most dangerous phase, group activities. The exercise involved colored index cards, hypothetical workplace crises, and something the facilitator kept calling collaborative emotional mapping. At one point, a man from procurement said, "I feel my leadership style is best represented by a lighthouse." Nobody challenged this. Francesca found herself cross-legged on a carpet square discussing communication barriers with 3 strangers and a Belgian regional director who smelled faintly of bergamot and despair. Across the room, Davide caught her eye and very subtly mouthed, "Help me." She looked away immediately because laughing during trust exercises only prolonged them. An hour later, walking out together, Francesca said, "I think I lost part of my personality in there." Davide nodded solemnly. "I gave mine up voluntarily around the second flip chart." In the hallway outside their rooms, he asked, "What's your evening plan?" "Answering emails I resent receiving." "And you?" she asked. "I was considering staring silently at the minibar until it revealed deeper meaning." "That sounds expensive." Growth usually is. She shook her head lightly and opened her hotel door halfway. But before she went in, Davide said, "You know what the strange thing is? I don't think anyone in that room is actually bad at their job." She paused. "No, neither do I. They're just tired." The simplicity of the observation caught her off guard, because it was true. Not incompetence, not failure, just exhaustion disguised as professionalism. He gave a small nod toward her room. "Enjoy your administrative recovery period." She frowned. "My what?" "The hour where you reorganize your suitcase emotionally before socializing again." Francesca stared at him. "How do you know I do that?" Davide smiled faintly. "Because you're the kind of person who folds tomorrow in advance." The sentence stayed with her long after he disappeared down the corridor. Inside her room, Francesca did exactly what he said she would do. On the terrace after dinner, the Roman night was warm and full of layered sound. Traffic, laughter, cutlery, a siren far away, a scooter passing with the self-importance of a small nation. Davide came to stand beside her, holding an espresso. "At this hour?" Francesca asked. "I like to keep my poor decisions organized." Below them, Rome stretched into lights and shadows. Not the postcard Rome, not immediately. This was Conference Hotel Rome. Traffic headlights, hotel awnings, glass doors, men smoking beside planters. But beyond it, somewhere, the old city waited. Stones, fountains, balconies, ghosts who had surely seen worse corporate events. "Do you ever feel," she asked carefully, "that your life is mostly maintenance?" Davide looked at her. She wished immediately she had not said it. Too real, too unprepared. But he did not make it awkward. He looked back out at Rome. "Yes," he said. That was all. Just yes. And somehow, because he didn't decorate the word, she believed him. The next afternoon, the retreat officially ended at 5:30. By 5:31, half the attendees had become luggage. Francesca had a train from Rome Termini to Milan at 6:50 p.m. From there, she would connect to Turin on a train back home. She had calculated everything. 28 minutes at Termini, enough but not too much. Too much time in a major train station invited snack decisions, and snack decisions invited regret. Davide was on the same train to Milan. This had been discovered at breakfast when he looked at her ticket and said, "Ah, we are co-passengers." Francesca frowned. "That's not a word." "It is now. Travel creates vocabulary." By the time the taxi dropped them at Termini, the sky was turning gold behind the station buildings, and Rome had entered that pre-evening state where everyone seems to be both late and refusing to hurry. Termini was alive with its usual theater. Tourists dragged enormous suitcases with the optimism of people who believed wheels solved everything. A priest bought a sandwich. A child screamed behind a vending machine as though betrayed by capitalism. Platform 12, Francesca said, checking the board. We have 18 minutes. Davide nodded toward the bar. Coffee? She turned to him slowly. Our train leaves in 18 minutes. 17 now. Davide. He looked at her with exaggerated seriousness. Francesca, I have survived emotional mapping, competitive moisturizing, and a panna cotta that looked more confident than our CFO. I deserve one espresso. Against her better judgment, she followed him. The espresso took 90 seconds. The problem began with the American couple. They were standing near the ticket machines, holding 3 tickets, 2 receipts, a phone, and the facial expressions of people who had just been introduced to Italian regional transport without preparation. The woman looked close to tears. The man kept pressing the same button on the machine with the determination of someone trying to negotiate with a printer. Davide noticed them first. Of course he did. He stopped. Francesca saw it happen. His attention shifted. His body turned slightly. His face softened. No, she said. They need help. Our train needs us. But Davide had already stepped toward them. Excuse me, can I help? The woman turned with the speed of the saved. Oh, thank God. We're trying to get to Orvieto, and I think we bought tickets to Orte. And then my husband validated something, but I think it was the receipt. Francesca arrived beside Davide and looked at the tickets. This is not Orvieto. What followed lasted 6 minutes, but felt like a small administrative war. There was a luggage issue, then a platform issue, then the woman's phone died, then the husband tried to put the ticket into the receipt slot again. No, Francesca said, more sharply than intended. Not there. The man froze. Davide leaned toward him kindly. She means the machine is emotionally fragile. By the time the couple had the correct information and the gratitude of people who would later describe Francesca and Davide as 2 lovely Italians, the departure board had changed. Platform 12, train to Milan, departed. For a moment, she simply stared, as if the world might apologize and reverse itself. Davide stood beside her holding his untouched espresso. Oh, he said. Oh? That does seem insufficient. Francesca inhaled, then exhaled, then closed her eyes. When she opened them, she checked alternatives, fingers moving quickly, violently. There's one at 7:25 p.m., fully booked. There's another at 8:10 p.m., also fully booked. Davide glanced at the espresso in his hand and sighed. The coffee has become symbolic. The last available train north with space would leave at 5:40 the next morning. We are stuck in Rome until morning. A strange silence opened between them. Around them, Termini continued performing human chaos. I'm sorry, Davide said. No joke, no embellishment. For some reason, that made it harder to stay angry. Francesca pressed her lips together. Then she started laughing. At first, Just a short, breathless sound. Then another. Then a real laugh. Not because it was funny exactly, because it was absurd. Because she had organized everything, planned, calculated, buffered, double-checked, and still ended up stranded in Rome with a man holding a dead espresso and the expression of a guilty schoolboy. Is this laughter? Davide asked, or the beginning of a medical episode? Francesca wiped under one eye. I don't know. Should I find a pharmacist? No, because you probably have one in your bag. That broke her completely. Davide smiled then, not triumphantly, gently, as if he were watching someone return to her. I hate this, she said finally. Davide nodded and said, naturally. And I'm also slightly relieved. His smile faded into something more attentive. Yes, he said. Again, just yes. They tried 3 hotels near Termini. The first had no rooms because of a medical congress. The second had 1 room, which both of them rejected with the speed and dignity of people determined not to become a misunderstanding. The third was too expensive in a way that felt personally offensive. Finally, Davide put his phone away. Okay, so we could sit in the station until morning. Francesca looked around Termini. A man nearby was eating tuna from a plastic container with his fingers. No, she said. I would rather join a trust exercise. Then we go further. Davide raised his hand for a taxi. There's no reason to stay near Termini if we have the whole night. The taxi pulled up. They loaded their suitcases and climbed in. Davide said simply to the driver, Al Pantheon, per favore. Francesca looked at him. That's 40 minutes away. Yes, he settled back into the seat. Rome is not for worrying about distances. Outside, the city slid past in warm evening light. Baroque facades, orange-lit piazzas, streets narrowing, then opening again. Francesca watched it go by in silence. She had driven through Rome dozens of times. She had never once simply looked. The taxi left them near Piazza della Rotonda. The Pantheon stood before them in the dark, like something that had survived everyone's opinions. The square was still alive, waiters carrying trays, children chasing each other, people speaking in 5 languages under the watch of ancient stone. Francesca stopped. Oh, she said softly. Davide stood beside her. For once, he did not make a joke immediately. She looked up at the columns. I forget, she said. What? That things can last without constantly explaining themselves. Davide looked at her. The sentence seemed to surprise her as much as him. That was borderline profound, he said, but I'll allow it. They found a small trattoria on a side street still serving dinner. Mismatched tables outside, a waiter who looked at them, their suitcases, their conference badges still hanging around their necks, and nodded, as if people escaped things here all the time. Francesca removed her badge and placed it in her bag. Davide noticed. Retired from public service? I don't want to eat pasta while wearing my job title. They ordered carbonara, fried zucchini flowers, and mineral water. Davide added wine. "We missed the train," he said simply. "The night has already lost its argument for discipline." When the food arrived, Francesca realized she was hungry, actually hungry. Not conference hungry, where one eats because food is scheduled. Human hungry. She took a bite of carbonara and closed her eyes briefly. "What?" she asked, catching him watching her. A face of respect. "You approach the carbonara with appropriate seriousness." She pointed her fork at him. "This is the first competent thing that has happened today." Davide lifted his glass. "To competent carbonara." A scooter passed too close. A woman at the next table scolded someone on the phone with the energy of an opera compressed into casual clothing. For a while, they ate. The silence between them was easier now, occupied. After dinner, they walked slowly, past lit windows, past shuttered shops, past the fountain where tourists were still taking photos, as if proof could help them feel what they were seeing. "Do you like your work?" she asked at some point. Davide leaned one forearm on a railing overlooking a quiet piazza. "I like people," he said. "I'm less enthusiastic about what companies do to them." That's a sad answer. It's a Tuesday answer. Sad, but not terminal. It's Thursday. Then we're doing well. At midnight, they found a cafe near Campo dei Fiori still open. Tables sticky, coffee served by a man who looked like he had personally forgiven every human weakness except indecision. Davide ordered 2 espressos. Francesca said, "Absolutely not." Davide revised. 1 espresso, 1 chamomile tea. The barista looked at him as if he had requested a harp. Francesca laughed. "Wine, then." Davide glanced at her. That escalated. "I'm adapting." They sat outside with 2 small glasses of red wine. The night had loosened around them. Francesca's hair had escaped slightly from its clip. Davide's jacket was folded over the back of his chair. Neither of them looked like the people who had registered at the beige hotel 2 days earlier. "Can I ask you something?" Davide said. "That sounds ominous." "It isn't. Probably." "Go on." He looked at her carefully. "Do you want to keep doing your job?" She was still for a moment. Then she looked at the table. There it was. Not the question. The answer. Waiting. "No." It came out quietly, not dramatically, but clearly. Davide did not look surprised. This annoyed her and soothed her at the same time. "What would you do instead?" "I don't know." "That's allowed." I think I want to work in Turin," she said eventually. "Properly. Not just sleep there between Milan days. I want mornings that don't begin with departure boards." "Well, that sounds reasonable." "It sounds smaller." "Smaller than what?" She thought about that. "Than what I was supposed to want." "Who told you what you were supposed to want?" Francesca smiled faintly. "No one specific. Everyone generally." He nodded, as if this were a perfectly valid department. "Everyone generally is a terrible manager." That made her laugh so hard, the barista looked over. She covered her face with one hand. Davide smiled. "There," he said. "What?" "That laugh. I don't think I've ever heard it before." Francesca felt something shift inside her, a small ache. Not because of Davide, because he was right. She had many laughs. Work laughs, dinner laughs, polite laughs, reassuring laughs. But this one, this ridiculous, unguarded, slightly unattractive laugh, felt almost unfamiliar. Like a room in her own house she had stopped entering. "I used to be less careful," she said. He waited. "When I was younger, I thought adulthood would make me more free, more myself. Instead, somewhere along the way, I became useful." Davide nodded. "Useful is a very respectable trap." For the first time, Francesca asked him something real. "Are you happy?" He laughed once, quietly. "That's a dangerous question after midnight. Is there a safer time?" Probably between 10 and 10:30, after breakfast and before emails." She smiled. Davide leaned back. "I'm not unhappy," he said finally. "My marriage ended 6 years ago. Not badly, just honestly, which is almost worse. My daughter grew up, my apartment became quiet, and work became louder. For a while that seemed like balance." He looked toward the street. "Now I think I confuse peace with nobody needing me." "I'm sorry," Francesca said. "Don't be. It's not tragic. It's just accurate." At 2:15 in the morning, they walked again. Rome had become quieter, though never silent. Cities like Rome do not sleep. They simply lower their voices and let the ghosts take over. They passed a bakery where someone was already working inside. Flour on the counter, trays waiting. Francesca stopped at the window. A man in a white apron moved through the warm light, arranging dough with slow, practiced hands. "He's starting the day," she said. Davide stood beside her. "Or ending yesterday." "That's depressing." "It's Rome. Both are probably true." At some point, without deciding to, they stopped trying to fill every silence. That was when Francesca realized she was no longer performing. Not competence, not ease, not charm. She was simply tired and awake and alive in a city she had not planned to inhabit. Near 3 in the morning, they found a bench by a small fountain. Their suitcases stood in front of them like obedient dogs. Francesca rested her head back against the stone wall behind the bench. "I should be miserable," she said. "Are you?" She considered. "No, I'm tired. My back hurts. I have no toothbrush. My daughter will mock me when I tell her this." She looked at the water. "And yet, I feel more here than I have in months." Davide was quiet. Then he said softly, "Maybe because you couldn't leave." She looked at him. He kept watching the water. "Sometimes leaving is how we stay in control." Francesca closed her eyes. The fountain moved softly in the dark. She thought of all the ways she left rooms internally before meetings ended, left conversations by becoming helpful, left herself by becoming efficient. Always moving, always useful, always almost somewhere else. When she opened her eyes, Davide was looking at the fountain, not at her. She was grateful. Davide? Yes? Thank you for making us miss the train. He turned slowly. I believe history will show the American couple deserves partial responsibility. She smiled. Fine. Thank you for helping them. That I can accept. At 4:30, they made their way back toward Termini. The city was beginning to pale at the edges. Garbage trucks moved through narrow streets. A man washed the pavement outside a cafe. Birds began making unreasonable claims about the morning. Francesca's suitcase wheel clicked beside her. Click, click, click. Davide looked down. It sounds happier now. It's delirious. A common side effect of Rome. The 5:40 train to Milan was populated by the defeated, the disciplined, and the recently unlucky. Francesca and Davide boarded with the solemnity of people returning from a small, unofficial war. Their seats were across from each other. Francesca put her suitcase above the seat. Davide tried to help. She waved him off. I've got it. I know. There was something in the way he said it that made her pause. Not correction, recognition. She sat by the window. Outside, Rome slid slowly backward. Or they moved forward. It depended, Francesca thought, on what kind of morning you were having. Her phone buzzed. Emails, messages, a calendar reminder. Her life returning, politely aggressive. She looked at the screen, then turned it face down. Davide opened one eye. Bold. Francesca looked out the window. Reckless, really. He smiled and closed his eye again. Somewhere after Florence, Davide fell asleep. Not gracefully. His head tilted to one side, his mouth open just enough to suggest betrayal by gravity. Francesca watched him with affection. Not romantic affection exactly. Something gentler. The tenderness one feels toward another human being after seeing them tired, kind, ridiculous, and real. She took out her notebook, the one from the retreat. 6 pages of notes on human-centered collaboration. She turned to a blank page. At the top she wrote, "Things I know now." Then she stopped. The train moved north. Fields brightened, people woke. Someone unwrapped a sandwich far too early. She wrote, "I do not want to spend the next 15 years administrating my own exhaustion." She stared at the sentence. It looked severe and true. Below it, "I want to live where I live. Then, I want to laugh like that again." She closed the notebook before she could overthink it. On the platform in Milan, Francesca's connection to Turin left in 22 minutes. For once, she did not rush. "Well," Davide said. "Well," she replied. The word carried more than it should have. He smiled. "Try not to reorganize your entire life by Tuesday." Francesca looked at him. No promises. Start with Wednesday. She laughed. Then after a brief hesitation, thank you. For what? For seeing me when I thought I was just being efficient. His expression changed, softer now, less amused. You were never just efficient, he said. For a moment, the station moved around them. People passed. A suitcase bumped Davide's ankle. Someone shouted into a phone. Life, as usual, refused to pause for meaningful exchanges. Francesca nodded once, not because she had nothing to say, because she had enough. Her train appeared on the board. She reached for the handle of her suitcase. Davide stepped back. Safe travels, Francesca. She smiled. You too, Davide. Then she walked toward her platform. Click, click, click. The wheel sounded the same as before, but she didn't. 3 months later, Francesca resigned. Not dramatically, not in a blaze of self-discovery. Francesca did not do blazes. She wrote a careful resignation letter, revised it 14 times, and worried unnecessarily about inconveniencing people who would replace her access badge within a week. She accepted a position in Turin. Smaller company, smaller title, shorter commute, more actual mornings. When she told Davide, it was by text. I thought you should know. I'm leaving at the end of the month. He replied 12 minutes later. Leaving the company or fleeing capitalism entirely? She wrote, starting with the company. I'll assess capitalism after probation. Davide replied, very sensible, proud of you. Francesca looked at those words for a long time. Then she placed her phone face down on the kitchen table and laughed. Not the full midnight Rome laugh, not yet, but close. They did not become a couple. That feels important to say. Life is not always improved by turning every meaningful encounter into romance. Sometimes, a person enters your life not to stay beside you, but to interpret the sentence you were using to describe yourself. Davide and Francesca remained in touch, occasionally, lightly. A photo of a terrible station sandwich, a text during another corporate event, a link to an article about burnout with the subject line, everyone generally strikes again. Once, when Francesca passed through Milan, they had coffee near the station. 27 minutes. No grand reunion, no confession, just two people who had once missed a train and for 6 strange hours stopped missing themselves. Francesca still made lists. She still answered emails too quickly, but now, sometimes, she lets them wait. On Sunday mornings, she began walking through Turin without headphones. At first, this felt inefficient. Then it felt like weather. Then it felt like prayer. She noticed things. A man arranging apricots at the market as if they were small suns. A woman laughing into her phone outside a bakery. The particular silence of porticos before the shops open. The way her own city had been waiting for her to live in it properly. One morning, she stopped at a cafe and ordered a brioche she did not need. She ate it standing at the counter, powdered sugar falling onto her coat. For a moment, she reached for a napkin automatically. Then she stopped. Let the sugar sit there. A tiny white inconvenience. A small evidence of having been alive before noon. And when her daughter called that afternoon and asked how she was, Francesca did not say, busy. She did not say, fine. She looked out the window at Turin, at the quiet street, at the light moving across the buildings with no interest whatsoever in productivity. Then she smiled and said, I'm here. And for once, she meant it literally and completely. Some journeys stay with us long after we arrived. As always, this story was inspired by a real submission. Names, identifying details, and some circumstances have been changed to protect the privacy of the people involved. The real Davide shared this story not because something extraordinary happened that night, but because something ordinary did. Two people stepped briefly outside their routines and saw each other, and perhaps themselves, a little more clearly. I recently spoke with Davide about why this missed train stayed with him for so many years, and what he believes was really happening beneath the surface of that unexpected night in Rome. Davide, I have to ask the obvious question first. Of all the stories someone could send me, why this one?
Honestly, because nothing dramatic happened. And somehow, this is exactly why it stayed with me. Nobody died. Nobody kissed in the rain. We just missed the train. But after that night, I kept thinking about it. Not every day, but many times, especially when I was traveling for work again.
What stayed with you specifically?
Francesca laughing in the station. Not polite laughing, not work laughing, real laughing. I think this was the moment I understood the train was not really the important thing anymore.
You know, when we first spoke about this story, you made a distinction between different kinds of laughter.
Oh yes. Adults have many kinds of laughter. There is, I am being nice laughter. Please stop speaking laughter. I work in corporate and I need my salary laughter. And then sometimes there is the laugh that comes before the person remembers to control themselves again. This was the Rome laugh.
Had you always noticed Francesca this carefully?
I noticed Francesca little by little. I think this is how we really notice people most of the time. We worked together for years. Meetings, conferences, trains, and she was always very competent, very organized. The kind of person who makes everything easier for everybody else. Which sounds good, and it is good. But after some time you start thinking, okay, but where is she inside all this?
That's such an interesting thing to say because Francesca doesn't come across as unhappy in the story.
No, this is the thing. Francesca was not unhappy. Honestly, I think this would have been easier. She was functioning very well. Too well, maybe. And I think many adults live like this. Not terrible, not wonderful, just efficient.
So do you think she knew that about herself?
Intellectually, maybe. Emotionally, I don't think so. I think she believed she was being responsible. And she was being responsible. But after some years, responsibility can become your whole personality if you're not careful.
There's something in the story where you notice her shoulders relax during the conference. That detail stayed with me.
That was a nice detail. Thank you for adding it, because it was mine too, actually. It was such a small thing. Most important moments are small like this. She laughed at something stupid I said, which is already dangerous enough, and suddenly she looked lighter. Not transformed, just less tense, less prepared for impact all the time. And once you notice somebody has been bracing themselves for years, it becomes difficult to stop seeing it.
Do you feel seen that night too?
Yes. People talk about loneliness like it only means being alone at home, but there is another kind too. The kind where everybody knows you as reliable, competent, easy, and after some years nobody asks you real questions anymore, because you seem fine all the time. I think both Francesca and I had a little of this.
There's something very tender in the fact that this never became romantic. Was that intentional?
Life already puts too much importance on romance. Not every important connection needs to become a relationship. Sometimes somebody just arrives in your life for a few hours and reminds you that you are still a person outside your routines.
Did it change you?
Yes, I think it changed me too. Not in a dramatic way. I still go to meetings, still answer emails, still buy too many charging cables. But after Rome, I started noticing how tired people are, especially the very competent ones, the people everybody depends on. And I also started asking myself, am I living my life or only managing it well? This is not always a comfortable question at 58.
You sound fond of Francesca.
I was fond of Francesca, yes. But maybe not in the way people expect. I think I felt protective of the version of her that appeared after midnight, the version that laughed more, the version that stopped apologizing for taking space. You could understand she had not seen this part of herself in a long time.
Did you know she was going to leave the company?
No. But when she told me, I was not surprised either. Once somebody realizes they are exhausted in the wrong direction, it becomes very difficult to continue exactly the same way.
Do you think she changed because of that night?
No. I don't think the night changed her completely. I think maybe it reminded her that she still had permission to change.
That might be one of my favorite answers anyone has ever given me on this podcast.
That's concerning. I've mostly been improvising.
Okay, one last question. When you think back on that night now, what's the first image that comes to mind?
Honestly, the suitcase wheel. Click, click, click. We walked through half of Rome listening to this ridiculous sound. At some point I realized the wheel was not even broken. It just didn't care about elegance anymore. Maybe this was the healthiest thing in the whole story.
Some stories stay with us because of what happened. Others stay with us because of what almost didn't. If this episode reminded you of a person, a conversation, or a version of yourself you've been meaning to revisit, perhaps that's reason enough to keep it close. If you'd like to help more listeners discover the podcast, you can follow the show, leave a review, or share this episode with someone who might need it. And if there's a story you've been carrying, a what if, a second chance, or a quiet turn that changed everything, I'd love to hear from you. I'm Andrea Applewick, and this is If I Could Say One More Thing.